This place hasn't changed," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "Not really." Clara turned to him, her fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. She wore a simple ivory dress, elegant but understated, her way of saying she wasn't trying to impress. "You've never brought anyone here before?" she asked, her tone careful, neutral, though her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. "No," Leonardo replied after a pause. "Only family." The word hung between them, heavier than either expected. Clara looked out the window again. Through the trees, the ancestral home emerged. Grand but not ostentatious, built of pale stone and dark timber, its windows glinting like watchful eyes. Ivy climbed the eastern wall, and smoke curled lazily from the chimney. It looked less like a mansion and more like a memory made solid. "You're nervous," Leonardo observed, not unkindly. Clara laughed softly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Wouldn't you be? You're inviting me into the one place you've kept sealed off from the world. I feel like I'm walking into a room where everyone already knows the rules. Except me." He reached for her hand then, his thumb tracing slow circles over her knuckles. "There are no rules here, just truth. And maybe ghosts." She searched his face. "Why now? Why me?" Leonardo exhaled, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Because for the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm playing a role. With you, I'm just me." He hesitated, then added, almost as an afterthought, "And maybe I'm ready to stop running from what I left behind." Clara squeezed his hand, but something in her chest tightened. She had always known Leonardo carried shadows. He was, after all, a man who'd built empires while barely blinking. But this place felt different. It wasn't just a house. It was a reckoning. As the car rolled to a stop in the courtyard, the front door opened before they even stepped out. An elderly woman in a modest black dress stood in the threshold, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her eyes sharp yet kind. "S.U. Leonardo," she said, her voice warm but tinged with something unreadable, relief, sorrow. "We've been waiting." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hello, Dona Elvira. You look well." The woman's gaze flickered to Clara, then back to him. "The house remembers you," she said quietly. "Even when you forget it." Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. The air was thick with unspoken history. Every stone, every rustle of leaf seemed to whisper secrets she wasn't meant to hear. Yet, Leonardo stepped out and offered his hand to help her from the car. As her feet touched the gravel path, she felt the weight of the past pressing gently against her skin. "I hope you're ready," he murmured, squeezing her hand once more. She wanted to say she was, but as she looked up at the towering windows, half expecting to see faces peering down, all she could think was, what have I walked into? And somewhere deep in the house, unseen, a boy with Leonardo's eyes paused in the hallway, frozen at the sound of his father's voice, after 12 years of silence. "Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller disinvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada topico que for disinvolve. Mi conti sobrio topico tu com dialogo como su fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de disinvolver com vida moco. Com dos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters 4:16 p.m. 12 years. That's how long it had been since Leonardo Valenka signed the divorce papers in a sterile lawyer's office downtown. His signature sharp and final, like a blade slicing through the last thread of something that had once felt unbreakable. Back then, he hadn't cried. He hadn't even hesitated. Business was collapsing. His father's legacy was crumbling under debt. And Isabel, gentle, quiet Isabel, had asked for space. He mistook it for rejection. So he gave her freedom. And in return, she gave him silence. Now, standing in the master suite of the ancestral home, the very room where his grandfather once proposed to his grandmother, Leonardo poured himself a glass of aged whiskey, the amber liquid catching the firelight. He hadn't touched alcohol in years, not since the boardroom scandals, not since he'd vowed to be in control at all times. But tonight, control felt like a cage. He stared out the window at the moonlit garden. Clara was downstairs, chatting politely with Dona Elvira, trying to belong in a world that didn't know her. And he was haunted not by ghosts but by absence. A soft knock at the door startled him. "Come in," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Dona Elvira entered, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't speak at once. She simply looked at him. The way his shoulders slumped, the way his eyes kept drifting to the old family portrait above the fireplace's parents. His grandparents, all stern and proud, and childless beyond him. "You haven't asked," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Asked what about her?" Leonardo frowned. "Isabel, no. I assumed she moved on, married someone else. Happy." He said it like a prayer, something he needed to believe to keep breathing. Dona Elvira stepped closer, her eyes glistening. "She did move on, but not the way you think." She paused, as if weighing the cost of truth. "She never remarried. She lives quietly, in a small town near the coast. Teaches literature at the local school." Leonardo's chest tightened. "Why are you telling me this, then?" With a trembling hand, she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small photograph, slightly worn at the edges, but carefully preserved. She held it out. He took it slowly, and the world stopped. A boy, around 11 or 12, standing on a beach, wind in his hair, smiling with his hands in his pockets. Bright eyes, strong jaw, and that unmistakable tilt of the head, the same way Leonardo used to look at the camera when he was young. His breath hitched. "Who?" Dona Elvira's voice broke. "His name is Miguel. He was born 9 months after the divorce was finalized." Isabel didn't tell anyone, not even her own mother at first. She was afraid you'd take him away into your world, the meetings, the headlines, the pressure. She wanted him to grow up knowing kindness before knowing wealth. Leonardo's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the edge of the dresser, the photograph trembling in his hand. "She never told me." "No," Dona Elvira said gently. "She wrote to you once. A letter. I saw her mail it. But you never replied." "I never got it," he whispered, horror dawning in his voice. "I swear. I never got it." The old woman nodded slowly. "Maybe it was lost. Or maybe life got in the way." Leonardo sank into the armchair, pressing the photo to his chest like a lifeline. A son. He had a son. All these years, birthdays, first steps, first words, school plays, he'd missed them all. While he built skyscrapers and closed billion-dollar deals, his own blood was learning to read, to ride a bike, to dream without him. A tear traced a slow path down his cheek. Not from anger, not from blame, but from the unbearable weight of a love he never knew existed, and the crushing guilt of absence. "I didn't even know to miss him," he choked out. Downstairs, laughter floated up, the bright, innocent sound of a child's voice. Leonardo's head snapped up. "Is he here?" Dona Elvira nodded. "Isabel brings him once a year, on the anniversary of your grandmother's passing. She said it was the one tradition she wanted him to know, that he belongs to this family, even if you never knew." Leonardo stood abruptly, the photo clutched in his fist. His heart hammered like a drum calling him home. Not to power, not to money, but to fatherhood. He walked to the door, then stopped. "What if he hates me?" "He doesn't know you yet," she said softly. "But children, they feel truth before they understand words. If your heart is open, he'll see it." Leonardo took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway. The house, once a monument to pride, now felt like a cathedral of second chances. And somewhere below, his son, a living echo of everything he'd lost, was humming a tune his mother had taught him, completely unaware that his entire, and then he saw them. Through the arched doorway leading to the library, Isabel stood near the fireplace, her back turned, her dark hair pulled into a loose knot. She was speaking softly to a boy, his boy, who sat cross-legged on a Persian rug, flipping through an old book with illustrations of sailing ships. The boy laughed at something she said, a bright, clear sound that cut through Leonardo like grace. Isabel hadn't changed much. Still slender, still carrying that quiet strength he'd once mistaken for passivity. But there was something new in her posture. A protectiveness, a rootedness. She wasn't just a woman now. She was a mother. And that changed everything. Leonardo's breath caught. He should announce himself. Say something. Apologize. Explain. But words felt too heavy, too clumsy for this moment. So he simply watched. Miguel looked up then, just as if he sensed being seen, and their eyes met across the room. Time stopped. The boy's smile faded, replaced by curiosity, then uncertainty. He tilted his head, just like Leonardo did when puzzled. Isabel turned, following his gaze, and froze. Her face went pale. Her hand instinctively reached out and rested on Miguel's shoulder. A silent shield. "Miguel," she said, voice steady but tight. "Go check if Dona Elvira needs help in the kitchen." "But I just got here," he protested, still staring at the stranger on the stairs. "Now, please," she said, softer this time, but firm. The boy hesitated, then stood slowly, casting one last glance over his shoulder as he left. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, Isabel turned fully to Leonardo. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, her voice low, controlled, but beneath it, he heard the tremor. "I live here," he replied, descending the last few steps, his voice hoarse. "Or, I thought I did." She crossed her arms, a barrier. "I meant you weren't supposed to see him. Not like this. Not unprepared. I didn't know he existed until 10 minutes ago," he said, holding up the photograph. "Dona Elvira showed me." Isabel's eyes flickered to the photo, then back to his face. "And now what, you'll swoop in with your money and your name and rewrite his life like it's a merger?" "No," Leonardo said quickly, stepping closer. "God, no. I need to understand. Why didn't you tell me?" She looked away, toward the fire. "Because when we divorced, you weren't just leaving me. You were erasing yourself from everything emotional. You were drowning in your father's debts, obsessed with proving you weren't a failure. I wrote you 3 letters, Leonardo. 3. I told you I was pregnant. I begged you to call. Just once. I never got them," he insisted, pain cracking his voice. "I swear on my life I would have come. I would have—" "What?" she interrupted, turning sharply. "Married me out of duty, raised him between board meetings and charity galas, given him a trust fund, but no bedtime stories." Leonardo flinched as if struck. Because she was right. Back then, he would have done exactly that. He hadn't known how to love without conditions, without strategy. But that man was gone. "I've changed," he said quietly. "Maybe," she said, her voice softening slightly. "But Miguel isn't a project to fix. He's a child who thinks his father died before he was born. That's the story I gave him, to protect him from abandonment." The word abandonment hung in the air like smoke. Thick, suffocating. Leonardo turned toward the window, pressing a hand to his forehead. "I didn't abandon him. I didn't even know." "You abandoned us," she said, finally letting the tears fall. "You walked away without looking back. And when I needed you most, scared, alone, pregnant, you were already building your empire on the other side of the world." He had no defense, only regret, vast and oceanic. "I can't undo it," he whispered. "But I can be here now, if you'll let me." Isabel studied him, the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders no longer carried that arrogant lift, the raw vulnerability in his stance. The man before her wasn't the tycoon on magazine covers. He was just a father, lost and aching. Before she could answer, the library door creaked open. Miguel stood there, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate, one slightly sloshing over the rim. "I brought you some," he said, offering one to Isabel. Then, after a beat, he looked at Leonardo. "Dona Elvira said you're Uncle Leo, but you don't look like an uncle." Isabel's breath hitched. Leonardo's throat tightened. He knelt slowly, lowering himself to the boy's eye level. "No," he said gently. "I'm not your uncle." Miguel frowned. "Then who are you?" The silence stretched, fragile as glass. And in that moment, Leonardo faced the most important decision of his life. Not as a CEO, not as an heir, but as a man standing on the edge of grace. He began, voice trembling. I'm someone who just found out he has the most important person in the world and doesn't know how to say sorry for missing so much. Miguel blinked. Then, with the unfiltered honesty only a child possesses, he asked, "Are you my dad?" Isabel made a small sound. A gasp, a sob, but didn't interfere. Leonardo looked at her. She gave the tiniest nod. Permission, not forgiveness. Not yet, but a chance. He turned back to Miguel and met his eyes, those eyes that mirrored his own. "Yes," he said, voice breaking. "If you'll let me be." Miguel didn't hug him, didn't smile. He just studied him carefully, as if trying to decide if this stranger's heart was big enough to hold him. And then, quietly, he handed Leonardo the second mug of hot chocolate. "You spilled a little," he said, "but it's still warm." Leonardo took it, tears spilling freely now. Not from sorrow, but from the terrifying, beautiful weight of a second chance. That if he blinked, this moment would dissolve like mist. Miguel stood before him, still watchful, his small frame radiating a quiet courage that belied his age. Isabel remained frozen a few feet away, her arms no longer crossed but clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles pale. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows that seemed to hold their breath. Then, from the hallway, a gentle voice cut through the tension. "S.U. Leonardo," Dona Elvira said, appearing in the doorway with a tray of fresh linens draped over her arm. Her eyes, wise, weary, and warm, flickered between the three of them. She'd seen it all: the young lovers, the bitter divorce, the lonely years, the secret visits. And now this. She set the tray down without a word, then walked slowly to Miguel, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've grown taller since last winter," she said, her voice thick with affection. "Your great-grandmother's eyes, your grandfather's hands, and your father's stubborn chin." Miguel looked up at her, then at Leonardo, as if confirming the truth of her words. Leonardo finally stood, carefully setting the mug on the mantel. "You knew," he said to Dona Elvira, not as an accusation, but as quiet awe. "All this time you knew." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I was there the night your mother told me she was pregnant. She was crying in the garden, clutching her stomach like it might disappear. I promised her I'd keep her secret, but also keep the door open. For you. For him." She glanced at Miguel. "This house, it's not just stone and wood. It's memory, and blood, and love, even when it's broken." Isabel finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to keep him from you forever. I just needed time to raise him somewhere safe, where he wouldn't be a headline or a bargaining chip." Leonardo turned to her, his expression raw. "I understand, and I don't want that either. I want to know him, even if it's 1 minute at a time." Miguel shifted his weight, then, with sudden boldness, asked, "Do you know how to play chess?" Leonardo blinked. "Yes, my grandfather taught me on that very table." He pointed to the antique chess set in the corner, its pieces carved from walnut and ivory. Miguel's eyes lit up. "Mom says I'm good, but she lets me win." Isabel gave a small, reluctant smile. "Only when you've had a bad day." "Will you play with me?" Miguel asked Leonardo, his voice tentative but hopeful. The question hung in the air, a simple challenge, yet monumental. Not just a game, an invitation, a test. Leonardo knelt again, meeting his son's gaze. "Only if you promise not to go easy on me." Miguel grinned, really grinned, and pulled out a chair. "I never do." As they sat across from each other at the chessboard, Isabel hovered near the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching. Dona Elvira quietly retreated, leaving the door ajar, just enough to give them space, but not abandon them to silence. The first move was made. A pawn advanced, then another. The pieces clicked softly against the board, the only sound in the room besides the crackling fire. Leonardo watched his son's face, how his brow furrowed in concentration, how his tongue poked slightly from the corner of his mouth when he was thinking. He saw himself, yes, but also Isabel's grace, her patience, her quiet fire. "You're not playing like most adults," Miguel said after a few turns. "You're not rushing." "I'm trying to see the whole board," Leonardo replied. "Not just the next move." Miguel considered that, then moved his knight. "Mom says life's like that. You can't just think about today. You have to protect your people." Leonardo's throat tightened. "She's right." A long pause. Then softly, "Did you know about me before today?" Leonardo looked up from the board. "No, not until a few hours ago. But the second I saw you, I knew. You feel like home." Miguel didn't respond immediately. He studied the board, then moved his bishop. "Check." Leonardo stared at the pieces, then at his son. He hadn't even seen it coming. From the doorway, Clara stood unseen, having come looking for Leonardo. She'd heard the voices, followed the silence, and now stood frozen, watching this tender, fragile scene unfold. Her heart ached, not with jealousy, but with the painful clarity that she was witnessing something sacred she could never be part of. She turned quietly to leave, just as Dona Elvira appeared beside her. "He's finally where he belongs," the old woman murmured. Clara swallowed hard, tears welling. "I think I was never meant to stay, just to lead him here." Dona Elvira touched her arm gently. "Love isn't always about keeping. Sometimes it's about letting go, so someone else can be found." Inside the library, Leonardo moved his king out of danger, but his mind was no longer on the game. "Miguel," he said gently, if I asked to spend time with you real time, would you want that?" The boy looked up, his eyes searching his father's face. "Do you have time?" The question struck Leonardo like a stone to the chest. "Not will you, but do you?" As if time itself was the rarest currency. "I'll make it," he said firmly, "even if I have to tear down my whole world to find it." Miguel nodded slowly. Then, with the innocent wisdom of a child who's already learned too much about absence, he said, "Okay, but you have to promise something." "What?" "You can't disappear again." Leonardo reached across the board, not to move a piece, but to cover his son's small hand with his own. "I swear on this house, on my mother's name, I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and the ancestral home seemed to sigh, relieved, finally, after decades of waiting. But upstairs, in the guest room, Clara packed her suitcase with quiet resolve, folding the ivory dress she'd worn that morning like a relic of a life that was never hers to keep. The game downstairs wasn't just chess. It was the first move in a new beginning, and bed like a surrender flag. Her hands trembled slightly as she tucked a stray hair behind her ear, but her eyes were dry now. The tears had fallen quietly in the bathroom, muffled by the rush of the faucet, so no one would hear. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but she'd heard enough. Not just the words, "You can't disappear again," but the silence that followed, the weight of it, the way Leonardo's voice cracked not with regret, but with devotion, and the way Miguel had spoken, not with anger, but with cautious hope. That was the hardest part. She wasn't being replaced. She was simply unnecessary, not because Leonardo didn't care, but because something deeper, older, truer had surfaced, something that didn't need her to exist. A soft knock at the door startled her. Clara, Isabel's voice, gentle, hesitant. Clara took a breath, smoothed her blouse, and opened the door. Isabel stood there, still in her simple linen dress, her eyes red-rimmed but calm. She held 2 cups of tea. "I saw you leave the library," she said. "I thought you might want company." Clara stepped aside without a word. Isabel entered, set the cups on the dresser, and turned to face her. For a long moment, neither spoke. 2 women bound not by rivalry, but by the same man's fractured heart, each loving him in a different season of his life. "You're leaving," Isabel said finally. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded, her voice steady. "He doesn't need me here. Not now. Maybe not ever." Isabel's gaze softened. "That's not fair to you. Or to him. He cares about you. I saw it in the way he looked at you when you arrived. Like you were his piece. Clara gave a faint, sad smile. Peace is beautiful, until truth arrives. She wrapped her arms around herself. I thought I was helping him heal, but I was just a placeholder. A distraction from a wound he didn't even know he had. Isabel stepped closer. You're not just that. You made him soft again. That's no small thing. Men like Leonardo, they build walls so high they forget how to climb back down. You handed him the rope. Clara looked at her, really looked, past the composure, past the quiet strength, and saw the woman beneath, tired, guarded, but fiercely loving. A mother who'd carried a secret for over a decade. Not out of spite, but out of protection. Why didn't you hate me? Clara asked suddenly. When you saw me walk in with him. Why weren't you angry? Isabel let out a quiet breath. Because I've been where you are. I loved a version of him that didn't exist yet. The real man, the one who cries over chess games and promises not to disappear. That man had to be born through pain. You helped him get closer to that birth. Tears welled in Clara's eyes again, but she didn't wipe them away. I don't know how to walk away without feeling like I failed. You didn't fail, Isabel said firmly. You loved honestly. That's never failure. She paused, then added almost shyly. And if you ever want to visit, Miguel likes people who ask questions. And you see people, not just their roles. The offer hung between them. Fragile, generous, unexpected. Clara swallowed hard. I'd like that. Someday. Downstairs, the low murmur of voices drifted up. The deep timbre of Leonardo's laugh. The bright chime of Miguel's. A sound Clara had never heard from him before, not the polished charm of a tycoon, but the unguarded joy of a father. Isabel followed her gaze toward the door. He'll come looking for you, she said softly. And when he does, don't make it easy for him to pretend this didn't change everything. Clara nodded. I won't. Just then, footsteps approached, slow, hesitant. The door creaked open before either woman could speak. Leonardo stood there, his suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled up, his eyes searching Clara's face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. I looked everywhere, he said. I thought maybe you'd gone. I was just packing, Clara replied, gesturing to the suitcase. He stepped inside, glancing at Isabel, who gave him a small nod before slipping out, closing the door behind her with quiet grace. Silence stretched. Then Leonardo spoke, voice raw. I didn't know this would happen. I didn't know he existed. If I had... I know, Clara interrupted gently. You don't have to explain. I saw your face when you looked at him. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. Like your soul remembered him before your mind did. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and grief warring in his posture. I don't want to lose you, Clara. But I can't ask you to stay while I figure out how to be a father. It wouldn't be fair. She stepped forward and took his hand. Once so commanding, now trembling slightly. You're not losing me. You're just choosing what matters most. And that's okay. Her voice broke. Because if I truly loved you, I'd want you to find the part of yourself you never knew was missing. He pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if memorizing her shape. You were the first person in years who made me feel like I was enough, just as I was. And you are, she whispered into his shoulder. Even more now. They stood like that for a long time, two hearts untangling, not with anger, but with grace. When they finally pulled apart, Clara picked up her suitcase. I'll call a car. No, Leonardo said. Let me drive you. One last time. She hesitated, then nodded. As they walked down the hallway together, the house seemed to hold its breath. Portraits of stern ancestors watched from the walls, but for the first time, Leonardo didn't feel their judgment, only their silent witness. At the front door, Dona Elvira stood waiting, holding Clara's coat. You'll come back, the old woman said, not as a question, but as a quiet certainty. Clara smiled faintly. Maybe. Leonardo helped her into the car, then closed the door slowly. He didn't say goodbye, just placed a hand on the roof, watching as the headlights cut through the mountain dusk. Inside the house, a window opened upstairs. Miguel leaned out, calling, "Dad, your turn to make hot chocolate." The word "Dad" floated through the cold air, fragile and new. Leonardo turned, his face illuminated by the porch light. Older, softer, finally whole. And as the car disappeared down the winding road, Clara pressed her forehead to the window, whispering not to Leonardo, but to herself, "Go be his father." Behind "Dad, you promised." He turned, and the word "Dad" still startled him, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt like coming home after a lifetime lost at sea. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing with the weight of a promise he'd only just begun to understand. In the library, Miguel sat cross-legged by the chessboard, but he wasn't playing. He was staring at the family portrait above the fireplace, the one of Leonardo's parents on their wedding day. His expression was unreadable. "He looks like you," Miguel said without turning. "Your dad, I mean." Leonardo came in and knelt beside him. He was complicated, proud, quiet. He never said, "I love you," but he showed it in other ways. Fixing my bike at midnight, walking me to school even when he was exhausted. He paused. "I always thought that was enough. Now I wonder if it wasn't." Miguel looked at him then, eyes wide and searching. "Do you think I'll miss things too when I'm older?" The question struck Leonardo like a blade between the ribs. "No," he said fiercely. "Not if I can help it. I'll be there for your first heartbreak, your first job, your worst day and your best. Even if you don't want me there, I'll be nearby, just in case." Miguel was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, "Mom says you used to live here all the time. Before everything." "I did," Leonardo said. "But I left because I thought success meant never looking back. I was wrong." Just then, Isabel appeared in the doorway, arms crossed but her posture softer than before. She'd changed into a cozy sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked tired but at peace. "He's been asking about your room," she said, nodding toward Miguel. "Says he wants to see where you grew up." Leonardo's throat tightened. His childhood room, untouched for decades, was down the hall, filled with old books, a broken model airplane, and the baseball glove his father never taught him to use. "You can show him," Isabel said gently, "if you're ready." He wasn't sure he was, but he nodded. As they walked down the hallway, Miguel's fingers brushed the carved banister, his eyes wide with wonder. "This house feels alive. It remembers," Leonardo said. "Every laugh, every argument, every secret." He opened the door to his old room. Dust motes swirled in the lamplight. The bed was neatly made, the desk still holding yellowed school papers. On the wall hung a faded map of the world, dotted with pins, places he'd sworn he'd visit someday. Miguel walked in, drawn to a shelf filled with toy soldiers. "Did you play with these every day?" Leonardo said, smiling faintly. "I used to make up epic battles. The blue ones always won." Miguel picked one up, turning it in his hands. "Do you still like winning?" Leonardo hesitated. "I used to think winning meant being alone at the top. Now, I think winning means having someone to share it with." Miguel placed the soldier back carefully. Then, almost shyly, he asked, "Can I stay here tonight in this room?" Leonardo looked at Isabel, who stood in the doorway watching them, her eyes shimmering. "It's your room too now," Leonardo said, voice thick. "If your mom agrees." Isabel gave a small, tearful smile. "Just one night. Tomorrow we go home." Miguel beamed, and in that smile, Leonardo saw not just his own reflection, but the future unfolding, tender and uncertain. Later, after Dona Elvira brought up blankets and hot milk, after Isabel kissed Miguel's forehead and whispered goodnight, Leonardo sat on the edge of the bed, watching his son drift to sleep, clutching one of the old toy soldiers like a talisman. He didn't move for a long time, just watched the boy breathe, steady, trusting, whole. Then, from the hallway, Isabel's quiet voice, "You're not going to disappear tomorrow, are you?" He turned. She stood there in the dim light, arms wrapped around herself, her vulnerability laid bare. "No," he said, rising slowly. "I'll drive you both home, and then I'll ask if I can visit next weekend, if that's okay." She studied him, searching for the old arrogance, the polished detachment. But it was gone. In its place was something humbler, truer. "You've changed," she said. "I had to," he replied. "I didn't know I had a son. But now that I do, I can't go back to being the man who misses everything that matters." She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Leonardo. He believes you already." "I know," he said, meeting her gaze. "That's why I'll spend the rest of my life keeping them." Outside, the wind stilled. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. And in that hallway, under the watchful eyes of ancestors long gone, two parents, once torn apart by silence, stood together, not as lovers, but as guardians of something far more precious, a child who finally knew his name, his roots, and the quiet, enduring truth that love, even when late, is never too late. The way he sometimes smiled in his dreams, as if already living a life where his father was always there. Now, as the first birds began to sing, Miguel stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and for a heartbeat, confusion flickered across his face. Then recognition, warm and immediate. "You stayed," he said, voice thick with sleep. "I did," Leonardo replied, his own voice rough from silence and emotion. Miguel sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Mom says grown-ups usually leave before you wake up." Leonardo's heart clenched. Not this one. Just then, footsteps echoed in the hall, light, familiar. Isabel appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of steaming tea. She wore a simple dress, her hair still damp from a morning wash, and though she looked tired, there was a new softness in her expression. "He's awake," she said, offering 1 mug to Leonardo. "And hungry, I imagine." Miguel scrambled out of bed. "Do we have pancakes?" Dona Elvira's voice floated up from the stairwell. "With blueberries? Just how you like them." Laughter, light, effortless, filled the room. And in that moment, it didn't feel staged or tentative. Felt like the beginning of something real. Downstairs, they gathered in the sun-drenched breakfast nook, a long table set with mismatched china and fresh wildflowers in a mason jar. Miguel chattered about a book he was reading, about explorers who mapped unknown islands, and Leonardo listened, truly listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, but absorbing every word like treasure. But as the meal neared its end, a shadow crossed Miguel's face. He set down his fork, glanced between his parents, and asked quietly, "Are you two going to be together now?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Isabel and Leonardo exchanged a look, not of panic, but of shared understanding. "No, Miguel," Isabel said gently. "We're not. But that doesn't mean we can't both love you. Very much." Leonardo leaned forward, elbows on the table, meeting his son's eyes. "What matters is that I'm your father, and I'm not going anywhere. Whether I live in this house or visit yours, I'll be part of your life, every day I can." Miguel considered this, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but can I call you Dad? Even when you're not here?" Leonardo's eyes welled. "You can call me anything you want, but Dad, that's the best name I've ever had." Just then, Dona Elvira entered with a small wooden box. "This came in the mail yesterday," she said, placing it before Leonardo. "I almost threw it away, it looked like old bills. But something made me keep it." Leonardo frowned, opening the box. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, his name scrawled in Isabel's handwriting, the same elegant script he remembered from their university days. He looked up at her, stunned. "You said you wrote to me?" "I did," she whispered, "3 times. That must be the last one." Hands trembling, he pulled out the letter. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. "Leonardo, if you're reading this, maybe it means you finally looked back. I'm 8 months pregnant. His name will be Miguel. He has your eyes already, even in the ultrasound. I'm not asking for anything. No money, no marriage, no grand gestures. Just If you ever wonder whether you left something behind, know this: you left a son. And he deserves to know you, even if you don't deserve him yet. Isabel. Leonardo couldn't speak. He pressed the letter to his chest, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. All these years, the truth had been waiting, lost in the machinery of his relentless forward motion. Miguel, sensing the shift, slid closer. What does it say? Leonardo looked at him, tears streaming freely now. It says your mother believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Isabel reached across the table, not touching him, but offering her presence like an anchor. You have a chance now. That's all any of us ever get. Just then, Miguel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I want to show you something. He ran out of the room and returned moments later with a small canvas, painted in bright, uneven strokes. A house on a hill. 3 figures in front of it, a tall one, a medium one, and a small one holding both their hands. I painted it last night, he said shyly, before I went to sleep. I didn't know if it would be real, but I hoped. Leonardo took the painting, his voice breaking. It's real now. Outside, the sun climbed higher, spilling warmth over the garden where Clara had once stood uncertain, where ancestors had walked in silence, where secrets had festered in the dark. But today, the house wasn't haunted. It was healing. And as Miguel climbed onto his father's lap, something so simple, so ordinary, yet so monumental, Leonardo held him tightly, whispering into his hair words he should have said a decade ago. I'm here. I see you. I love you. Not as a tycoon, not as an heir, just as a father, late but not too late. And in that sunlit kitchen, with the scent of blueberries and old paper in the air, the past didn't vanish, transformed into promise, quiet wonder. He's never been this light, she said softly. Not since he started asking questions about his father last year. I thought I'd protected him, but maybe I just delayed the healing. Leonardo's voice was rough with emotion. You gave him stability. That's more than I ever offered anyone. She glanced at him. You're offering it now. Before he could respond, Miguel called from the old stone gazebo near the orchard. Dad, come see what I found. They followed. Inside the gazebo, half hidden under a loose floorboard, was a small metal box, rusted at the edges. Miguel held it open proudly. Inside lay a handful of old photographs, a dried wildflower, and a tarnished pocket watch. It was Grandpa's, wasn't it? Miguel asked, holding the watch up. Leonardo took it gently. The engraving on the back read, to my son. Time is all we truly give. His throat tightened. His father had left it on his desk the day he died. Leonardo had been in Singapore closing a deal. He'd never seen him again. Yes, he said, voice barely audible. He wanted me to have it. Why didn't you take it? Miguel asked, innocent but piercing. Leonardo looked at Isabel, then back at his son. Because I thought time was something you saved. For deals, for success, for the future. I didn't understand. It's something you spend. On people. Miguel turned the watch over in his small hands. Does it still work? Leonardo pressed the crown. A soft, hesitant tick echoed in the quiet air. Faint, but alive. It does, he whispered. Just needed someone to wind it. Miguel looked up, eyes bright. Can I keep it just for today? Leonardo hesitated, then nodded. But promise me something. What? Don't let it stop again. Miguel solemnly slipped the chain over his neck, the watch resting against his chest. I won't. Isabel watched them, her heart aching with a bittersweet fullness. This wasn't the reunion she'd feared. Chaotic, possessive, destructive. It was gentle, earned, human. Just then, Dona Elvira appeared at the edge of the lawn, her expression unreadable. "SU Leonardo," she called, voice urgent but calm. "There's a call from the city. Your assistant. It's urgent." The word hung like a storm cloud. Leonardo's jaw tightened. For years, urgent had dictated his life. Mergers, crises, boardroom fires. But now, he looked at Miguel, who was carefully placing the dried flower back in the box. The boy glanced up, sensing the shift. "You have to go," he asked, trying to sound brave. Leonardo knelt. "I don't have to do anything that takes me away from this moment. Not anymore." But Isabel placed a hand on his arm. "You built an empire, Leonardo. People depend on you. Ignoring it won't make you a better father. It'll just make you absent in a different way." He searched her eyes. "What do I do? Choose balance," she said firmly. "Not all or nothing. That's the trap you fell into before." He stood slowly, then pulled out his phone. "I'll call him back. Tell him I'm taking the week off. Indefinitely." Miguel's face lit up, but then dimmed. "Will you come back?" Leonardo cupped his son's face in his hands. "Every night. Even if it's just to say goodnight over the phone. Even if I have to drive through the night. I'll be there." Miguel nodded. Then, impulsively, hugged him. Tight, sudden, fierce. Leonardo froze for a heartbeat, then wrapped his arms around the boy, burying his face in his hair, breathing him in like oxygen. He hadn't known how much he'd been suffocating until this moment. When they parted, Isabel smiled through tears. "He's never hugged a man before. Not like that." Leonardo's eyes burned. "Then I'll make sure he never stops." As they walked back toward the house, Miguel skipping ahead, the pocket watch glinting in the sun, Leonardo felt something shift inside him. Not a collapse, but a realignment. The tycoon was still there, yes, but beneath the titles, the wealth, the legacy, a father had finally awakened. And this time, he wouldn't sleep through his son's life. That evening, as fireflies blinked in the garden and Dona Elvira served stew in earthen bowls, Miguel sat between his parents at the long table. No longer a triangle of tension, but a circle of tentative trust. After dinner, as Isabel washed dishes and Miguel read aloud from his explorer book, Leonardo stepped onto the porch. The city lights shimmered far below, calling like sirens. But up here, in the quiet, something far more valuable waited. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. "Board is furious. They're calling an emergency vote." He stared at the screen for a long moment, then powered it off. Inside, Miguel's voice floated through the open window. And the explorer didn't find gold. He found something better: home. Leonardo sat in the armchair by the hearth, the turned-off phone heavy in his lap. He hadn't moved in over an hour. Not since Miguel drifted off, murmuring, "Dad," in his sleep. Now the silence wasn't empty. It was full of presence, of possibility, of a love long buried but finally unearthed. Isabel turned slowly, her eyes meeting his across the room. There was no anger there, no blame, only a quiet, aching tenderness. "You really turned it off," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "I've spent my life answering every call like the world would end if I didn't. But tonight, the only call that matters is the one I already answered." She walked closer, stopping a few feet away. "They'll try to pull you back. The board, the investors, the headlines. They'll say you're being reckless, that you're throwing away everything you've built." "Maybe I am," he said, his voice raw. "But what good is an empire if you have no one to share it with, if your own son grows up thinking you chose profit over presence?" Isabel's eyes shimmered. "You're not the man I divorced anymore." "No," he admitted. "I hope not." She sank into the chair opposite him, her hands trembling slightly. "When I saw Clara drive away, I didn't feel relief. I felt grief, because I saw how much she loved you. Not the tycoon, but the man beneath. And I realized I never gave that man a chance. I only saw the ambition, the walls. I ran before he could surprise me." Leonardo leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And now," she looked toward Miguel, her voice breaking. "Now I see him, the man who kneels to tie his son's shoes, who listens more than he speaks, who chooses a bedtime story over a billion-dollar deal." She turned back to Leonardo, tears spilling silently. "I don't know if we can be more than co-parents, but I know I don't want to shut you out again." He reached across the space between them, not to hold her hand, but to gently brush a tear from her cheek with his thumb, careful, respectful, full of remorse and hope. I don't need us to be anything but honest, he said. But I need him to know he's loved by both of us. Fully. Without conditions. Isabel nodded, covering his hand with hers for just a moment before pulling away. Then we start slow. You come to his school play next month. You meet his teacher. You learn his favorite ice cream, his fears, his dreams. Not as Leonardo Valenka, CEO. Just, Dad. He smiled faintly. I already know his favorite ice cream. Mint chocolate chip. He told me during pancakes. She laughed softly, the sound warm and unexpected. You were listening. Every word. A long silence settled, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. Cleansing, peaceful. Then, from the doorway, a small voice, "Are you talking about me?" They both turned. Miguel stood there, rubbing his eyes, the book clutched to his chest. "We're talking about how lucky we are to know you," Isabel said, opening her arms. He ran to her, then looked back at Leonardo. "Can Dad come too?" Leonardo's heart swelled. "Only if you want me to." Miguel considered this, then said, "I always want you to." And just like that, the three of them sat on the rug by the dying fire. Isabel with Miguel in her lap, Leonardo beside them, shoulder to shoulder, not as exes, not as strangers, but as something new, a family reassembling itself, piece by fragile piece. Miguel yawned. "Will you both be here when I wake up?" Isabel kissed the top of his head. "I will." Leonardo met his son's tired eyes. "And I'll be right here, all night." Miguel nestled in, already drifting. "Good," he murmured, "because I have a dream, and I want to tell you both about it when I wake up." Outside, the wind rustled through the pines, and the ancestral home, once a monument to solitude, now pulsed with the quiet rhythm of a second chance. And far below, in the city, boardrooms buzzed with panic, markets trembled, and headlines waited to be written. Breathing slow and even, Leonardo slumped against the armchair, head tilted back, one hand still resting near where Miguel's had been. They hadn't moved all night. He sat up slowly, the explorer book slipping from his chest. In the pale light, he studied his father's face, the lines around his eyes, the way his hair was messy from sleep, the faint stubble along his jaw. This wasn't the polished man from photographs or news segments. This was real. This was his. Careful not to wake them, Miguel rose and padded barefoot to the window. Outside, mist curled around the orchard trees like ghosts retreating at sunrise. He pressed his palm to the cold glass and whispered, "I knew you'd come." Knew what Leo's voice, hoarse with sleep but warm, made him jump. Miguel turned. His father was sitting up now, rubbing his eyes, watching him with that look again, awe, fear, love tangled together. "That you were out there," Miguel said, pointing toward the city far below. "Even when I couldn't see you." Leonardo's breath caught. He stood and walked over, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "I was lost, Miguel. Not because I didn't want to find you, but because I didn't know you existed. But the second I did," he placed a hand over his heart, "everything changed." Miguel looked down, scuffing his socked foot against the rug. "Mom says some people are like stars. You can't always see them, but they're still there, shining." Leonardo smiled faintly. "Then I promise to be the kind of star you can see. Every night." Just then, Isabel stirred, sitting up with a soft sigh. She blinked at them, sleep still heavy in her eyes, but she smiled when she saw them together. Father and son, bathed in morning light, already speaking a language only they were beginning to understand. "Good morning," she said, her voice tender. Miguel ran to her, then stopped mid-step, frowning. "Are we leaving today?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Isabel exchanged a glance with Leonardo. "We have to go home, Corrido. School starts again next week." Miguel's shoulders slumped. "But what about Dad?" Leonardo didn't hesitate. "What about me?" Miguel looked at him, eyes wide. "Will you come visit for real, not just a weekend?" "I'll come every weekend," Leonardo said firmly. "And I'll call you every night. And if you ever need me, even at 3 in the morning, you call, and I'll be there." No excuses. No delays. Miguel studied him, then asked the question that had been gathering in his small chest since yesterday. Why now? Why didn't you look for me before? The room stilled. Even the birds outside seemed to pause. Leonardo took a breath, his voice steady but raw. Because I didn't know. Your mother tried to tell me, but the letter, it never reached me. And I was so busy chasing success, I forgot to look back. He knelt fully now, taking Miguel's hands. But that's not your fault. It's mine. And I can't change the past. But I can fill every tomorrow with you. Miguel didn't cry. He just nodded slowly, then whispered, Okay, but you have to mean it. I do, Leonardo said, tears welling. With everything I am. Isabel rose and walked to them, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. We'll figure it out together, she said. All three of us. Later, over breakfast, fresh bread, honey from the estate's hives, and strong coffee, Miguel grew quiet again. He pushed his food around his plate, then finally looked up. What if I don't know how to be a son? He asked, voice small. I've never had a dad before. What if I do it wrong? Leonardo's heart shattered. You can't do it wrong, he said gently. There's no test, no rule book. You just be you, and I'll be me, and we'll learn together. Miguel considered this, then asked, Do you know how to build a treehouse? Leonardo chuckled, relief washing over him. I've never built one, but I'd love to try with you. Miguel's face lit up. Mom says the old oak in our yard is perfect for it. Isabel smiled. It is. Strong. Deep roots. Leonardo met her gaze. Like us, she held his look for a long moment. Maybe, if we choose to be. After breakfast, as Dona Elvira packed a basket of pastries and homemade jam for the road, Miguel wandered into the study and returned with a notebook. I want to write things down, he announced, so I don't forget. Forget what Leonardo asked. What you say, what you promise, what we do together. He opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote in careful, looping letters, Dad's promises. Below it, he drew a small star. Leonardo watched, throat tight. What's the first one? Miguel looked up. You'll come next Saturday and bring blueprints for the treehouse. Leonardo smiled. Already on it. As the car idled in the courtyard, Miguel hugged Dona Elvira tightly. I'll write you letters, he promised. You'd better, she said, kissing his forehead. Or I'll send the hounds after you. Then came the moment neither adult knew how to navigate goodbye. Miguel stood before Leonardo, small but resolute. Don't disappear, he said. Again, the same words from the night before, but now laced not with fear, but with quiet trust. I won't, Leonardo vowed, kneeling one last time. And when you come back, this house won't be just mine anymore. It'll be yours too. Miguel nodded, then wrapped his arms around his father's neck. The second hug, but this one longer, surer. Isabel watched from the car, tears streaming silently down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of surrender. To hope, to healing, to the fragile miracle unfolding before her. As they drove away, Leonardo stood in the courtyard, hand raised in farewell until the car vanished around the bend. Inside his pocket, the old letter from Isabel crumpled slightly with every heartbeat. And in his chest, something new took root. Not regret, but resolve. Shampoo mingling with wood smoke and morning bread. Leonardo stood in the center of the grand hall, hands in his pockets, staring at the staircase where his son had bounded up just hours ago, calling, Race you to the top, Dad! He hadn't raced. He'd let the boy win, and it had been the sweetest victory of his life. Now silence, but it was a different silence. Not the hollow kind that had haunted him for years, the silence of boardrooms at midnight, of penthouse suites with panoramic views but no one to share them with. This silence was full. It hummed with memory, with promise, with the quiet ache of missing someone you'd only just met. He walked slowly into the library, drawn to the chessboard still set where they'd left it. One of Miguel's pawns lay toppled on its side. Leonardo picked it up, brushing his thumb over the smooth wood. Check, the boy had said, eyes gleaming. Not just a move, a challenge, a test. And Leonardo had failed it, not by losing, but by almost not seeing it coming. He sank into the chair, the weight of the past week pressing down, not like a burden, but like a reckoning. All those years, all those choices, the late nights that weren't about work, but about escape. The deals closed not for growth, but to prove, to his father, to the world, to himself, that he wasn't the boy who cried when his dog died, who hid in the library to avoid his father's disapproval, who once whispered to his mother, "I wish I could just disappear." He'd built an empire to fill that emptiness. And in doing so, he'd nearly missed the one thing that could have filled it for real: a son who looked at him like he was already enough. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Dona Elvira entered, holding a tray with a single cup of tea. She set it down without a word, then stood by the window, watching the road where the car had disappeared. "He asked about you," she said quietly. "This morning," said, "Will Dona Elvira remember me when I come back?" Leonardo's eyes burned. "What did you say?" "I told him the house remembers everything. And so do I." She turned to him, her gaze steady. "You've spent your life running from weakness, SU Leonardo. But fatherhood, it asks you to be vulnerable, to fail, to show up even when you're afraid you'll get it wrong." "I am afraid," he admitted, voice breaking. "What if I'm not good at this? What if I say the wrong thing? What if he realizes I'm just learning as I go?" Dona Elvira smiled faintly. "Then you'll be like every other parent who ever loved their child truly. None of us are born knowing how. We learn by loving." He looked down at the pawn in his hand. "I used to think strength was control, never showing doubt, never needing anyone. And now I see that real strength is showing up with your heart wide open. Even when you're terrified it'll be broken." She nodded, then placed a folded envelope on the table beside his tea. "This arrived this morning, from the city." He didn't need to open it. He knew the letterhead, the board, the ultimatum: return immediately or face removal. For years, that would have sent him scrambling. Suit pressed, car waiting, mind already 5 steps ahead. Now he simply slid it into the drawer without reading it. "I'll deal with it later," he said. Dona Elvira raised an eyebrow. "You're choosing him over them." "I'm choosing myself," he corrected softly. "The self I lost a long time ago. The one who knew that time isn't measured in deals closed, but in moments shared." He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the oak tree in the east garden, the one Miguel had pointed to during their morning walk. "We're going to build a treehouse," he said, almost to himself. "He wants it to have a rope ladder and a telescope." Dona Elvira's eyes softened. "His great-grandfather built one there, in 1942. He said every boy needs a place to dream without being watched." Leonardo turned, surprised. "It's still standing, barely," she said. "But the bones are strong." He smiled. "Then we'll rebuild it. Together." That afternoon, he didn't call his assistant, didn't check his emails. Instead, he went to the estate's old workshop, a dusty shed behind the stables, and began sifting through tools, sketching rough plans on the back of an envelope. As he measured wood and sharpened blades, his mind wasn't on stock prices or shareholder reports. It was on Miguel's laugh, on the way he'd corrected Leonardo's grip on a chess piece, on the quiet pride in his eyes when he'd said, "You're learning fast, Dad." For the first time in his life, Leonardo wasn't building to impress. He was building to belong. And as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the sawdust-covered floor, he picked up his phone. Not to call the office, but to dial a number he'd memorized just yesterday. Rang once, twice. Then, a small, sleepy voice. "Hello?" Leonardo's heart leapt into his throat. "Hey, Explorer. It's Dad." A pause. Then, bright and clear, "You called. I promised I would," he said, voice thick. "Did you have a good day?" "Yeah," Miguel said. "But I missed you." Leonardo closed his eyes, leaning against the workbench. "I missed you too, more than you know." They talked for 20 minutes, about school, about the book he was reading, about whether squirrels could be trained to deliver mail, Maybe if we offer them peanuts. When they finally said goodbye, Miguel whispered, "Don't forget the blueprints." "I won't," Leonardo said. "Sweet dreams, son." He hung up and looked down at his hands, calloused now from real work, stained with sawdust, no longer just the hands of a tycoon. He called Miguel every night without fail. Sometimes they talked for minutes, sometimes for over an hour. The boy had begun leaving voicemails when Leonardo missed a call. Rambling updates about school projects, jokes told by his best friend, the way the neighbor's cat had followed him home. Each message was a lifeline, stitched with trust. Then came Saturday. Rain fell in soft sheets as Leonardo's car climbed the coastal road toward Isabel's quiet town. A place of cobblestone lanes, salt-kissed air, and houses with flower boxes spilling over with color. His palms were damp on the steering wheel, not from nerves, but from the sheer, terrifying wonder of it. "He's waiting for me." He parked outside a modest white house with blue shutters, the garden neat but whimsical, sunflowers, lavender, and a small hammock strung between two pines. Before he could even step out, the front door burst open. Miguel ran through the rain in bare feet, backpack bouncing, waving a rolled-up paper. "You're late," he called, but his grin betrayed no anger, only joy. Leonardo laughed, opening his arms as the boy crashed into him, rain soaking them both. "Only by 7 minutes," he said, holding him tighter than necessary. "You promised blueprints," Miguel said, pulling back just enough to thrust the paper into his hands. Leonardo unrolled it. It was covered in crayon drawings, ladders, windows, a flag on top, a secret trapdoor. "This is your design," he said, touched. "Yeah," Miguel said, suddenly shy. "I thought maybe we could build it together, like really together, not you doing it while I watch." Leonardo knelt, meeting his eyes. "That's exactly how we'll do it." Isabel appeared in the doorway, arms crossed but smiling. "You're dripping on the porch." "Worth it," Leonardo said, standing. Inside, the house was warm, filled with the scent of cinnamon and old books. Photos lined the walls, Miguel as a baby, on his first day of school, blowing out birthday candles. No men, no fathers, until now. As they sat at the kitchen table with mugs of hot cocoa, Miguel pushed a small envelope across the wood. "I wrote you a letter," he said, "like Mom used to do." Leonardo's breath caught. He opened it slowly. "Dear Dad, I used to wonder what you looked like. I'd look in the mirror and try to see you in my eyes. Now I don't have to wonder. I'm glad you found me." Miguel's tears blurred Leonardo's vision. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his inner pocket, right over his heart. "Thank you," he whispered. Later, in the backyard beneath the great oak, they spread both sets of blueprints on a tarp. Rain had eased to a drizzle, the sky soft gray. "We'll start Monday," Leonardo said. "I've already ordered the wood. Non-toxic, weather-resistant. I even found a retired carpenter who'll help us get the frame right." Miguel's eyes widened. "You really did all that?" "I promised," Leonardo said simply. Isabel watched from the porch, arms wrapped around herself, her heart full in a way she hadn't allowed it to be in years. She'd spent so long protecting Miguel from the world of wealth and expectation that she'd almost denied him the chance to know the man behind the name. Now, seeing them, heads bent together over plans, Leonardo patiently explaining load-bearing beams while Miguel asked if they could add a pulley system for snacks. She realized something: he wasn't the tycoon anymore. He was just Dad, and that was more than enough. As dusk fell, Miguel yawned, leaning against Leonardo's side. "Will you stay for dinner?" Leonardo looked at Isabel, seeking permission. She nodded. "Stay." Over a simple meal of fish stew and crusty bread, conversation flowed. Not forced, not fragile, but easy. Miguel told stories about his teacher, who believed octopuses were the smartest creatures on Earth. Leonardo shared how he'd once been terrified of the ocean as a child. "Why?" Miguel asked. "Because it was too big," Leonardo admitted. "I thought if I stepped in, I'd disappear." Miguel considered this, then said, "But the ocean is where you find ships, and islands, and treasure." Leonardo smiled. "You're right. Sometimes you have to step in to find what's waiting. After dinner, as Miguel brushed his teeth upstairs, Isabel walked Leonardo to the door. "He hasn't slept this peacefully all week," she said softly. "He's been waiting for you." "I'll never make him wait again," Leonardo said. She studied him, the tired lines around his eyes, the calm in his posture, the absence of the old arrogance. "You've changed, Leo. Love changes you," he said. "Real love. Not the kind that wants you to be perfect, but the kind that sees you trying and stays anyway." She reached out, briefly touching his sleeve. "Don't lose that." "I won't." As he walked to his car, Miguel appeared at the window, pressing his palm to the glass. Leonardo mirrored the gesture from outside. No words, just presence. And as he drove back through the rainy night, the city lights flickering in the distance like distant stars, Leonardo didn't think about the boardroom battles a testament to time spent together. Leonardo drove to the coast every Friday after work, returning Sunday evenings with sawdust in his hair and Miguel's laughter echoing in his chest. But the board hadn't forgotten him. One Saturday morning, as they sanded the wooden floor of the nearly finished treehouse, Miguel paused, squinting at the sky. "Dad," Leonardo didn't look up, focused on smoothing a rough edge. "Do you ever feel like two people are living inside you?" Leonardo finally glanced at him. "What do you mean?" Miguel shrugged, kicking at a pile of wood shavings. "Like, sometimes I'm just Miguel, the kid who likes comics and hates broccoli. But other times, I'm Leonardo Valenka's son, and people look at me different, like I'm supposed to be more." The words landed deep, echoing Leonardo's own unspoken fear. He set down the sandpaper and sat cross-legged on the platform, pulling Miguel to sit facing him. "I know that feeling," he said quietly. "For years, I wasn't Leonardo. I was Valenka Group CEO. I wore that name like armor, but armor keeps people out, even the ones you love." Miguel studied his hands. "Are you still him, the CEO?" Leonardo hesitated. "I still lead the company, but I'm not letting it lead me anymore. Not if it costs me moments like this." He gestured between them. "You're more important than any title." Miguel nodded slowly, then asked, "What if the company makes you choose?" Before Leonardo could answer, Isabel's voice called from below. "Leo, there's someone here to see you." He frowned. Visitors were rare in this quiet town. Climbing down, he saw a sleek black car parked at the curb, and beside it, his longtime assistant, Daniel, looking uncharacteristically tense in a rumpled suit, holding a briefcase like a shield. "Daniel," Leonardo said, wary. "What are you doing here?" Daniel glanced past him at Miguel peeking from the treehouse, then lowered his voice. "The board's calling an emergency vote. They've drafted a resolution to remove you as executive chairman unless you return full-time by Monday. They say your personal distractions are costing investor confidence." Leonardo's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away from his son. "I told them my priorities have changed. They say you're abandoning your legacy," Daniel pressed. "That you're letting sentimentality destroy a dynasty." From the treehouse, Miguel's voice floated down, small but clear. "Is it about me?" Leonardo's heart cracked open. He turned back to Daniel, his voice steady, calm, final. "Tell them this: my legacy isn't a company. It's my son, and I won't sacrifice one more second of his childhood for a balance sheet." Daniel looked stunned. "Leo, they'll replace you. They'll dismantle everything you built." "Then let them," Leonardo said, stepping closer. "Because I built it alone, and now I have something worth building with." He walked back to the treehouse and climbed up. Miguel was sitting with his knees drawn to his chest, eyes wide with worry. "Am I your distraction?" he whispered. Leonardo knelt, cupping his son's face. "You're my compass, the thing that finally showed me which way to go." Miguel blinked back tears. "I don't want you to lose everything because of me." "You're not because of you," Leonardo said fiercely. "You're because of love, and love is never a loss." That evening, as twilight painted the sky in lavender and gold, Isabel found Leonardo sitting alone on the back porch, staring at his silent phone. "He heard everything," she said softly, sitting beside him. He's afraid I'll disappear again, Leonardo murmured. Not physically, but become that cold man in the headlines. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, when I left you all those years ago, it wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I loved the man you could be, and I wasn't sure you'd ever let him emerge. He looked at her, surprised. You believed in me? Even then, I hoped, she corrected gently. Hope is different. It doesn't demand proof. It just waits. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. What if I fail? What if I can't protect him from the fallout? You already are, she said. By choosing him. By showing him that some things matter more than power. Inside, Miguel appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs. Hot chocolate, he announced, with extra marshmallows. For courage. Leonardo took the mug, his throat tight. Thank you, explorer. Miguel sat between them on the step, leaning against his father's side. Will you still come next weekend even if you're not the CEO anymore? Leonardo wrapped an arm around him. I'll come even if I'm sweeping floors, because being your dad isn't a job. It's who I am. Miguel was quiet for a while, watching fireflies blink in the garden. Then he said, I wrote another letter today, but I didn't finish it. What does it say? Isabel asked. Miguel looked up at Leonardo, eyes shimmering. It says, I'm proud of you, Dad. The words shattered something inside Leonardo. Something old, brittle, and heavy. He pulled Miguel into a fierce hug, his shoulders shaking with silent tears. Not tears of loss, but of release. Because for the first time he wasn't running toward success or away from failure. He was standing still. And in that stillness he'd finally found his son, and himself. Later, that night, as Isabel tucked Miguel into bed, he whispered, Do you think he'll really lose his job? She smoothed his hair. Even if he does, he gained something greater. What? A family. Downstairs, Leonardo stood in the garden, phone in hand. He opened his email, scrolled to the board's ultimatum, and typed a reply. Not defensive, not angry, but clear. My resignation as executive chairman is effective immediately. I leave the company in capable hands, but I keep what matters most, my son. And that is a deal I will never negotiate. He hit send. Salty air, and children still raced to school with half-eaten toast in their hands. But inside, everything had shifted. He sat at the kitchen table, a simple cup of black coffee before him, staring at the laptop screen where headlines already bloomed. Valenka steps down amid family priorities. Empire shaken as tycoon chooses son over boardroom. He closed the browser without reading further. None of it mattered. Not really. What mattered was the knock at the door. He opened it to find Miguel standing there, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes wide with urgency. Behind him, Isabel hovered on the sidewalk, arms crossed, but her expression wasn't disapproval. It was concern. Can I come in? Miguel asked, voice trembling slightly. Always, Leonardo said, stepping aside. Miguel hurried in, dropped his bag, and turned to face him. I heard what you did. Leonardo knelt. You mean quitting my job? Yes. Miguel's voice cracked. You didn't have to do that. I didn't want you to lose everything because of me. Leonardo's heart ached. Miguel, listen to me. I didn't lose anything. I gained clarity. For years, I thought my worth was in what I owned, what I controlled. But you showed me, just by existing, that my worth is in who I love and who I'm present for. Miguel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. But what will you do now? Leonardo smiled gently. I'll teach, maybe write, help small businesses in town. And every afternoon, I'll be at your school gate, rain or shine, unless you tell me not to. Miguel shook his head fiercely. I'll never tell you not to. He paused, then whispered. But, are you sad? Leonardo pulled him into a hug. Sometimes, change is scary, but I'm not regretful. Not for a single second. Just then, Isabel stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. He couldn't eat breakfast, she said, nodding at Miguel. Kept saying, what if Dad's alone? Leonardo looked up at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. I'm not alone. Isabel walked to the stove, filled the kettle, and set it on the burner, familiar domestic grounding. You know, when I first brought him here, I thought I was protecting him from your world. But maybe I was protecting myself from hoping you'd ever come back. Leonardo stood slowly. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to be part of his life, and yours if you'll have me in it. She turned, leaning against the counter, arms still crossed, but her guard was down. You're already part of it, Leo. You've been here every weekend. You helped him with his science project. You stayed up late fixing his bike. You remembered he hates carrots but loves beets. She gave a small, tearful smile. That's not performance. That's presence. Miguel, still clinging to Leonardo's hand, tugged gently. Can we go to the treehouse today? I added a flag. It's blue, like your eyes. Leonardo's breath caught. I'd love to. As they walked through the dew-damp streets toward the house with the blue shutters, the three of them didn't hold hands. Not yet. But they walked close, shoulders nearly touching, a silent constellation realigning itself. At the backyard, the treehouse stood complete, painted in warm cedar tones, a rope ladder swaying gently, the blue flag fluttering in the sea breeze. Miguel scrambled up first, then turned and reached down. Come on, Dad. Leonardo climbed up, the wooden steps groaning under his weight, and crawled inside. Sunlight streamed through the new windows. A small desk sat in the corner, covered in Miguel's drawings. A hammock hung between two beams. On the wall, tacked beside Miguel's latest letter, was the old pocket watch, still ticking. Miguel pointed to a fresh drawing pinned near the door. It showed three figures again, but this time they weren't just standing together. They were building something. A house. A life. I didn't draw the faces this time, Miguel said, because I know what they look like now. Leonardo wrapped an arm around him. What do they look like? Miguel leaned into him. Like home. Later that afternoon, as Isabel packed a picnic below, Leonardo sat alone in the treehouse, watching the ocean shimmer in the distance. He pulled out his phone, not to check news, but to open a new document. He titled it Lessons My Son Taught Me. He typed 1. Time isn't currency. It's love made visible. 2. A promise kept is worth more than a fortune earned. 3. You don't find yourself by climbing higher, you find yourself by kneeling down. Below, Miguel called up, Dad, Mom says if you don't come down, she's eating all the strawberries. Leonardo smiled, closed the laptop, and climbed down. At the picnic blanket, Isabel handed him a sandwich. You look lighter, she said. I am, he said. Like I finally put down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. Miguel grinned, mouth full of strawberry. Told you the treehouse was magic. It is, Leonardo agreed, looking between them. The woman who'd carried his son in silence. The boy who'd given him a second chance. But the real magic isn't up there. He tapped his chest. It's right here. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in gold and rose, the three of them sat in comfortable quiet, passing food, sharing smiles, building something far stronger than wood and nails. Family, not perfect, but present. And in that moment, with the sea whispering below and the treehouse watching, but life, even the most peaceful life, carries its currents beneath the surface. One evening, as the three of them sat on the back patio stringing fairy lights for Miguel's upcoming birthday party, his first with his father present, Isabel paused, her fingers still on a bulb. Miguel told his teacher you're his dad, she said quietly, not looking up. Leonardo froze mid-reach. And she asked if you two were together again. Isabel finally met his eyes, her expression unreadable. He didn't know how to answer. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions. Not just from Miguel, but from both of them. What were they, co-parents, friends, something tender and undefined, growing like ivy in the cracks of their fractured past? Miguel, sensing the shift, looked between them, his small hands stilling on the string of lights. Am I not supposed to say you're my dad? He asked, voice small. Leonardo's heart clenched. He set down the lights and moved to sit beside him. You can say it to anyone, Anytime. I'm proud to be your father. Always. But Miguel hesitated, glancing at Isabel. At school, Lucia said kids with two houses are confusing, that their parents don't really love each other. Isabel's breath caught. She knelt in front of him, cupping his face. Love isn't just one thing, meu amor. Sometimes it changes shape. Your dad and I don't live together, but we both love you more than anything. That's not confusing. That's just honest. Miguel looked at Leonardo. Do you love Mom? The question hung in the air like a held breath. Leonardo didn't look away. He met Isabel's eyes, really looked, and saw not the woman he'd failed, but the one who'd carried their son through silence, who'd taught him kindness without fanfare, who'd opened the door even when her heart was scarred. I love her, he said softly, for giving me you, and I love her for who she is. Strong, patient, true. That kind of love doesn't disappear. It just finds a new way to exist. Tears welled in Isabel's eyes, but she didn't look away. And I love him, she said to Miguel, for choosing you when it would have been easier to walk away. Miguel studied them both. Then, with the quiet wisdom only children untouched by cynicism possess, said, then maybe love isn't about living in the same house. Maybe it's about always showing up. Leonardo pulled him into a hug, his voice thick. You're right, explorer. That's exactly what it is. Later that night, after Miguel was asleep, Leonardo and Isabel sat on the porch swing, the sea whispering in the distance. He's going to ask again, she said. About us. Kids need clarity. I know, Leonardo replied. He turned to her. What if we tried not to rekindle what we lost, but to build something new for him? And maybe, for us if it grows. Isabel was quiet for a long time. I don't want to rush. I don't want him to think love is something you can just reassemble like a broken toy. It wouldn't be rushed, Leonardo said. It would be slow, honest, like the treehouse, beam by beam. She smiled faintly. You always did build things well. I'm learning to build people better, he said. Just then, Miguel appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, holding a small potted sapling. I couldn't sleep, he said. I wanted to plant this. Leonardo stood. What is it, a cherry sapling? From the nursery downtown. The lady said it'll bloom in spring. He looked up, eyes luminous in the moonlight. I want to plant it where we can all see it, so we remember. New things can grow even after winter. Isabel's breath hitched. Leonardo took the sapling gently, and together, the three of them walked to the edge of the garden, where the old oak cast its shadow but let in enough light for new life. They dug the hole together, Leonardo with the shovel, Isabel holding the sapling steady, Miguel patting the soil around its roots with his small hands. As they stepped back, dirt on their knees, sweat on their brows, Miguel took one hand of each parent and looked up at the stars. I had a dream last night, he said softly. We were all in the treehouse, and the flag wasn't blue anymore. It was rainbow, and the wind carried it so far, it touched the sea. Turquoise, and the treehouse flag, now stitched with a rainbow by Miguel's own hands, fluttered like a promise in the coastal wind. Leonardo no longer checked headlines. He taught a business ethics course at the local community college 2 days a week. His students often older than him, their eyes sharpened by real-world struggle, not boardroom intrigue. He traded corner offices for chalk dust, press conferences for parent-teacher meetings, and for the first time in his life he didn't feel like he was performing, he felt like he was living. One Saturday morning, he arrived at Isabel's house with a thermos of hot chocolate and a small wooden box. Miguel met him at the gate, taller now, his voice beginning to crack, his questions deeper. You're late, he said, but grinned as he took the thermos. Only by 3 minutes, Leonardo replied, ruffling his hair. You ready? Miguel nodded solemnly. Mom said it's time. Inside, Isabel stood by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a mug. She turned as they entered, her eyes soft but serious. He's 13 today, she said, and he asked if you'd take him somewhere. Just the two of you. Leonardo's chest tightened. I was hoping he would. Miguel looked between them, then said, I want to go to the ancestral house, the one with the chessboard and the gazebo. Leonardo's breath caught. You sure? Miguel nodded. I want to see where you grew up. I want to walk the halls and imagine you as a boy. And I want to plant something there too. Isabel stepped forward, placing a hand on Miguel's shoulder. It's your home as much as it is his. The drive up the mountain was quiet, but not strained, comfortable, like the silence between notes in a familiar song. Miguel stared out the window, watching the landscape shift from sea to forest to stone. Do you think Dona Elvira remembers me? He asked suddenly. Leonardo smiled. She talks about you every time we speak. Says you're the first Valenka in 3 generations who actually likes poetry. Miguel blushed. She told you that. She's proud of you, Leonardo said softly. We both are. When they arrived, the estate looked unchanged. Ivy still climbing the east wall, smoke curling from the chimney, but the air felt different, lighter, as if the house itself had exhaled after decades of holding its breath. Dona Elvira met them at the door, her eyes filling instantly with tears. Miguel, she cried, pulling him into a hug so tight his feet left the ground. You've grown into your name, Miguel, the one who is like God, because you brought your father back to us. Miguel laughed, embarrassed but pleased. I just asked him to stay. Leonardo watched them, his heart full. They spent the day exploring, not as guests but as family. Miguel ran his fingers over the spines of books in the library, sat in his father's old desk chair, and stood silently before the family portrait, studying the eyes of ancestors he now knew by name. At dusk, he led Leonardo to the east garden, where the old oak stood sentinel. I brought seeds, he said, pulling a small pouch from his pocket. Wildflowers, the kind that grow anywhere, even in rocky soil. Leonardo knelt beside him as they dug a small circle in the earth. Why here? Miguel looked up, his eyes reflecting the golden light. Because this is where you were lost, and I want something beautiful to grow from that. Leonardo's throat closed. He helped his son press the seeds into the soil, patting the earth gently over them. Will you come back to check on them? Miguel asked. Every month, Leonardo promised, for as long as they bloom. As night fell, they sat on the porch, sharing bread and cheese Dona Elvira had prepared. The stars emerged, one by one, brighter here than in the city, unclouded by ambition or noise. Miguel leaned against his father's shoulder. I used to dream about this place. I didn't know it was real. It's real now, Leonardo said, arm around him. And so are we. Later, as Miguel drifted off in his old room, the same one where he'd first called him Dad, Leonardo stood in the hallway, watching the rise and fall of his son's chest. Dona Elvira appeared beside him, holding a folded letter. This came for you, from the Valenka Foundation. He opened it slowly. It was an invitation, not to a gala, but to a quiet meeting. The board, humbled by his public resignation and the outpouring of support for his choice, had restructured. They wanted him back, not as CEO but as an advisor on his terms. Part-time, remote, family first. He read it once, then folded it and placed it in his pocket. No, he said quietly. Dona Elvira raised an eyebrow. You're refusing. I already have my legacy, he said, nodding toward Miguel. It's sleeping right there. She smiled, tears in her eyes. Your grandmother would be proud. The next morning, as they prepared to leave, Miguel paused at the grand staircase. He turned to Leonardo, serious now in a way that spoke of growing up too fast. Are you happy? He asked. Leonardo didn't hesitate. I didn't know what happy was until I knew you. Miguel considered this, then said, Then I'm glad I found you too. And with that, they walked out. Not as tycoon and son, not as strangers reunited, but as father and child, hand in hand, stepping into a future they were building together, one honest day at a time. One evening, after a swim in the cove, the three of them sat on the porch. Leonardo still damp-haired in a simple linen shirt, Isabel barefoot with a book in her lap, Miguel sketching in a new notebook, his pencil moving with quiet certainty. Mom says you got an offer, Miguel said suddenly, not looking up from his drawing. Leonardo exchanged a glance with Isabel. She gave a small, apologetic shrug. I didn't tell him. He overheard me on the phone with Clara. Leonardo nodded slowly. Clara, now a professor in Lisbon, had reached out months ago, not for him but for Miguel. She'd written a children's book about a boy who discovers his father through letters and old maps. She'd dedicated it, for the ones who choose love over legacy. And recently, she'd called with a proposal, a foundation for children of absent parents, and she wanted Leonardo to help shape it. Not as a tycoon, but as someone who'd lived the loss and the return. I did, Leonardo said carefully. It's a project to help kids who feel invisible, like they're waiting for someone who never comes. Miguel finally looked up. And you said no. I said, not yet, Leonardo corrected gently, because I promised I'd be here, fully, and I won't break that. Miguel studied him for a long moment, then closed his sketchbook. What if helping them is part of being my dad? Leonardo blinked. What do you mean? Miguel stood and walked to the edge of the porch, arms resting on the railing, gaze fixed on the sea. You taught me that real strength is showing up. But what if showing up means showing others how to find their way back too? He turned, eyes bright with conviction. I don't want to be the only kid who gets his dad back. I want other kids to have that chance. Isabel set her book down, stunned. Miguel? Leonardo felt his chest tighten with a pride so fierce it bordered on pain. His son wasn't just healing. He was becoming a light for others. He stood and walked to him. You'd be okay with me traveling sometimes for this? Miguel nodded. As long as you come back. And as long as you tell them about us. About how it's never too late. Leonardo pulled him into a hug, voice thick. You're wiser than I'll ever be. Later that night, after Miguel was asleep, Leonardo and Isabel sat on the beach, the waves whispering secrets to the shore. He's growing up so fast, she said, wrapping her shawl tighter. Sometimes I look at him and see the boy who cried when his goldfish died. And other times, I see a young man who carries your courage and my quiet, and something entirely his own. Leonardo watched the moon ripple across the water. I used to think love was about holding on. Now I see it's about letting each other grow, even when it scares you. She turned to him. You'd really do it? Help Clara build that foundation? I'd do it with you, he said. If you'll join me. You understand the silence better than anyone. The fear. The hope. Isabel was quiet for a long time. Then she smiled faintly. Only if Miguel comes to the first meeting. He's the heart of it. He already is, Leonardo said. The next morning, over breakfast, Miguel pushed a new drawing across the table. It showed a globe, with threads connecting children to parents across oceans, mountains, cities. In the center, a small house with a rainbow flag. I call it the map of second chances, he said shyly. Leonardo traced the lines with his finger. It's perfect. Then you'll say yes? Miguel asked. Leonardo looked at Isabel, then back at his son. Yes, but with rules. Miguel raised an eyebrow. Like, no trips longer than 3 days. Weekly video calls no matter where I am. And you get veto power if you say, come home, I come. Miguel grinned. Deal. Isabel reached across the table, her hand covering both of theirs. Then we'll do it together. Not as exes. Not as strangers. As a family who knows what it's like to lose and to find. That afternoon, Leonardo called Clara. I'm in, he said simply. Her voice, warm and steady, replied. I knew you would be. Not for the cause. For him. For all of them, Leonardo said. Starting with mine. As he hung up, Miguel appeared in the doorway holding 2 ice creams. Strawberry for you, he said, handing one over. Because it's your favorite. Even though you pretend to like dark chocolate more. Leonardo laughed, taking it. Caught me. They sat on the porch steps, shoulders touching, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. Will you tell your story? Miguel asked after a while. Only if you tell yours with me, Leonardo said. Miguel considered this, then nodded. Okay, but you have to promise one thing. What's that? He looked at his father, eyes clear and steady. Don't call it redemption. Call it return. Leonardo's breath caught. Why? Because redemption sounds like you had to earn me. But you didn't. You just had to come back. Tears filled Leonardo's eyes. He pulled his son close, the ice cream dripping forgotten between them. Air. Leonardo stood in the empty hall of the community center, adjusting chairs, hanging banners with simple words, "You are not too late." Miguel was helping nearby, arranging journals on each table, blank pages waiting for stories of regret, hope, and second chances. Isabel walked in carrying trays of tea and honey cakes, her hair loose, her steps lighter than they'd been in years. She set them down and watched her son hand a journal to an elderly volunteer. "He's nervous," she murmured to Leonardo. "He should be," Leonardo said softly. "He's about to stand in front of strangers and tell them how his father came back from a world of silence. That takes more bravery than any boardroom ever demanded of me." Just then, Clara arrived, older, wiser, her eyes holding the same kindness Leonardo remembered, but now layered with the quiet strength of someone who'd chosen purpose over possession. She hugged Isabel first, then turned to Miguel. "You ready, young storyteller?" Miguel nodded, though his fingers fidgeted with his jacket. "What if they think it's silly that our story isn't real enough?" Clara knelt to his level. "The most powerful stories aren't about grand gestures. They're about small truths, like a boy who drew his dad a map, and a man who finally followed it." Miguel smiled faintly. "Okay." As guests began to arrive, mothers with guarded eyes, fathers with hesitant steps, teenagers trailing behind with arms crossed, Leonardo felt his chest tighten. These weren't investors. They were people carrying the same wound he'd once ignored, the ache of absence. The program began simply. No podiums, no spotlights, just a circle of chairs. Miguel stood first. His voice trembled at first, then steadied. "My dad didn't know I existed for 12 years, he said, hands clasped. But when he found out, he didn't just come back. He stayed. Not because he had to, because he chose to." He looked at Leonardo, and that made all the difference. A woman in the back wiped her eyes. A man nodded slowly, as if remembering someone far away. Then Leonardo spoke, not as a tycoon, but as a man who'd wandered too long. "I thought success was building something that would last after I was gone," he said, voice rough with honesty. "But real legacy is showing up while you're still here, for your child, for your truth, even when it's messy, even when you're afraid you'll fail." Isabel stood next, her voice calm but firm. "I kept him away because I was scared. Scared he'd be swallowed by a world that doesn't value softness. But I was wrong. Love isn't about protection. It's about trust. And sometimes, trust means opening the door, even when your hands are shaking." After the talks, people lingered. A father asked Miguel how he'd forgiven. A mother asked Isabel how she'd found the strength to let go of resentment. Clara guided conversations with gentle questions, turning pain into possibility. Later, as the sun dipped low, the four of them, Leonardo, Isabel, Miguel, and Clara, walked along the shore, the retreat behind them, the sea before them. "You changed everything," Clara said quietly to Miguel. "Not with words, with your presence." Miguel kicked a pebble into the waves. "I just wanted them to know. It's okay to hope." Leonardo put an arm around his shoulders. "You gave them permission to believe again." Isabel watched them, her heart full. "We didn't just heal our family," she said. "We became a bridge." That night, back at the house, Miguel couldn't sleep. He found Leonardo on the porch, staring at the stars. "Did you ever think it would turn out like this?" he asked, sitting beside him. Leonardo smiled. "I didn't think it would turn out at all. I thought I'd die rich and alone, wondering what I missed." Miguel leaned his head on his father's shoulder. "I'm glad you didn't miss me. I'd find you in every lifetime," Leonardo whispered. Inside, Isabel stood in the doorway, watching them. Her son and the man who'd once left, now bound by something deeper than blood choice. Commitment, quiet, daily love. And Clara, pausing before her car, looked back at the warm light spilling from the windows and whispered to the night, "Some love stories don't end with happily ever after. They begin with, 'I'm here.'" The next morning, as golden light filled the kitchen, Miguel placed a new painting on the table. It showed the four of them on the beach, but their hands weren't just touching. They were planting seeds in the sand. "What's it called?" Isabel asked. Miguel smiled. "Where we grow." Leonardo touched the edge of the canvas, his eyes bright. "Then let's keep growing." And as the wind carried the scent of salt and autumn through the open windows, the ancestral home, once a monument to pride and silence, now stood as something else entirely, a sanctuary. Miguel, now a young man of 20, stood in the library, carefully placing a finished manuscript on the grand oak desk. The title, embossed in deep blue, "The Boy Who Waited." It was his first book. Not fiction, a memoir, of silence, of letters lost, of a father who came back not with fanfare, but with presence. Leonardo entered behind him, his hair now silver at the temples, his posture less rigid, his eyes softer. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "They're already calling it a masterpiece," he said, voice thick with pride. Miguel turned, smiling. "Only because it's true." He glanced toward the window, where Isabel and Clara sat by the fire, deep in conversation. Their friendship forged not in rivalry, but in shared hope. "Do you ever think about how it all started that weekend you brought Clara here?" Not knowing I existed, Leonardo's gaze grew distant. "I think about it every time I tuck in your little sister at night. Every time I watch your mother teach her to paint. Every time I sit at this desk and write letters to families asking how to come back." He paused. "That weekend wasn't the beginning. It was the reckoning. The moment the universe said you've built everything, except what matters." Just then, footsteps sounded in the hall, light, quick. A girl of 6, bundled in a red coat, burst in, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Papai, Vovo Elvira says dinner's ready." And Aunt Clara brought the star-shaped cookies. Miguel scooped her up, kissing her forehead. "You told her we only eat star cookies on special days, right?" "She said today is special," the girl declared. Leonardo's eyes met his son's over her head, both knowing why. Today was the anniversary of the day Miguel first called him Dad. The day everything changed. In the dining room, the long table was set with mismatched china, candles flickering, the scent of rosemary and roasted apples filling the air. Dona Elvira, older now, her steps slower but her spirit unshaken, placed a steaming tureen in the center. "You've filled this house," she said, her voice trembling. "Not with heirs or empires, but with heart." Isabel raised her glass. "To second chances. To showing up," Clara added. Miguel looked at his father. "To never disappearing again." Leonardo's throat tightened. He raised his glass last. "To the boy who waited, and the man who finally came home." After dinner, as snow began to fall softly outside, Miguel walked with his father to the east garden. The wildflowers they'd planted years ago still returned every spring, stubborn and bright. Beside them, the cherry tree, now tall and strong, stood bare but full of promise. Miguel stopped beneath its branches. "I